Despite its characteristics as a clean energy source, nuclear energy has not been a priority in the energy transition to date. Countries like Germany have shut down their last nuclear plants despite the loss of pipeline natural gas from Russia, and the US has been on a similar path with the Palisades and Diablo Canyon power plant closure decisions, as an example. You mentioned nuclear power, and most people think of nuclear accidents like Three Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima Daiichi. But despite these high profile safety accidents, nuclear energy may be seeing a comeback. A new plant has opened at Vogtle in Burke County near Waynesboro, Georgia. The first nuclear power plant in the Middle East has opened in the UAE, and a fourth generation plant opened in 2023 at the Shidaowan plant in China's northern Shandong province. Adding to these events, talk of a small modular reactor and growing interest in nuclear plants to power the new AI data centers, and maybe the idea of a comeback is not so crazy. In this episode, we talk with Dr. Naj Meshkati from USC about nuclear energy and risk management, a potential future of nuclear power plants.
Hi, Dr. Meshkati. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Energy Transition Talk. Um, Getting into it, Dr. Meshkati, could you tell us a little bit about your career, your current role at USC, and how you became involved in the safety, reliability, and efficiency of these complex, large technological systems?
Uh, Hello, Mila. Hello, Roshan. I'm Naj Meshkati. It's so nice to have such smart young people talking with me. I think meeting you guys made my day. Uh,
Thank you.
I'm
Thank
a
you.
professor at Viterbi School of Engineering, Sunny Astani Department of Civil Environmental Engineering, Daniel J. Epstein Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering, and I have also a joint appointment in international relations. That may sound a little odd, engineering international relations, but that is relates to my background. I don't know if you want to know my educational background or not, or you just want to know the professional. You just tell me. I can start from the beginning or chunk it however you guys want.
Feel free to explain as much as you want. I think it'd be nice to know how you started to where you got.
I mean, there is an article was written about me in Viterbi School of Engineering magazine, I think in 2021 or 2022. Uh, During the COVID, it was in Viterbi magazine. The title of the article is Accidental Professor. That's the title I suggested to the author. I'm an accidental professor because I studied engineering back in Iran, industrial engineering at Sharif University of Technology, which we like to think of it as MIT of Iran almost 40 plus years ago, before the revolution. And then because of my interest in international relations, political science, I double majored in another university in the evening in political science and international relations. And I used to carry between 40 to 45 units per semester for 4 years. But when my student they ask me, they tell me that they have two exams in one day. I say, you are talking to the wrong person. My record was 5 exams in 2 days. And
Wow.
Oh
anyway,
my gosh.
yeah, I graduated from both of those degrees. I passed the foreign service exam in Iran Foreign Ministry, but I decided to come just get a master's and go back, join the foreign ministry. But then a revolution happened in 1979, and the rest is history. But, and I decided to stay and continue my education in engineering. In 1979, of course, is before you smart young people were born. Uh, I was a very pure, I mean, I had my interest in international relations and IR, but I switched to engineering and industrial engineering. I was very interested in the area of decision analysis and decision making. But then on March 28, 1979, Three Mile Island nuclear plant accident happened in the United States. That was a major, major watershed event. It was a major nuclear accident in the United States. Of course, there was no radiation release, but it was a big deal. And that accident was attributed to operator's error, human factors issues, and that basically put me on this path of looking at human systems integration and interaction, human technology interaction and integration, because many people attributed that accident, 3 Mile Island nuclear plant, to operator error. And then a few years later, on December 3rd, 1984, Bhopal chemical plant accident happened. That was a release of methyl isocyanate, toxic gas from the Bhopal chemical plant of Union Carbide in city of Bhopal in Uttar Pradesh in India that killed overnight 2,000 people and injured 200,000. And out of that 200,000, unfortunately, on the average, 2 are dying per day. And when we commemorated its 30th anniversary in 2014, pretty much we are commemorating its 40th anniversary on December 3rd, 2024. The number of deaths reached to almost 30,000. And then 2 years later, Chernobyl accident happened. Chernobyl nuclear plants in now Ukraine, at that time Soviet Union, on April 26, 1986. That's considered to be the world's most important technological system failure and accident because of the radiation release and all the mass evacuation that it caused. And that was attributed also to the issue related to my area of interest, which is called safety culture. These events, 3 Mile Island 79, Bhopal 84, and then Chernobyl 86, that was the first 3 things that happened, one after each other, that put me on this path. Then, of course, throughout the years, as you know well, in 2005, BP refinery explosion happened in Texas City, Texas, that I worked with U.S. Chemical Safety Board investigators and investigating the root causes of that accident. I think that refinery explosion killed something like, unfortunately, 15 people and injured 180. And then in 2010, BP Deepwater Horizon offshore platform explosion happened in Gulf of Mexico that killed, I think, 11 people and injured several people. And I was a member of National Academy of Engineering, one of the 2 national panels that investigated that. Then in March 2011, Fukushima accident happened. Again, I was a member of National Academy of Science panel that investigated that. We went to Fukushima Daiichi, and you see some photos of yours truly in the Tyvek suit and face mask over here at Fukushima Daiichi. That's basically my background in a nutshell. I'm interested, Mila and Roshan, basically on the way that these safety critical technologies are run and what affects their safety and reliability. And all of these technologies, they have a human and organizational component that they run it. A technological component is one, but then there are 2 other subsystems. There are human subsystem and organizational subsystem. The third subsystem is, of course, engineered or technological subsystem. I'm interested in the interaction of these 3 subsystems and see if we could improve the safety and resiliency and reliability of these systems that I call them safety critical. But safety critical, I mean, if something goes wrong, if the system fails, it not only affects the operators, the people that will run it, but it also affects people that will live around that plant, like Bhopal or Chernobyl, or for that matter, in the case of Chernobyl, the rest of the world, because the radiation followed from Chernobyl traveled all over Europe and everything. And then for the last almost 30 years, I became very interested in the area of aviation, the issue of human factors in aviation. And just 2 years ago, I was appointed to this FAA expert panel on Boeing that we did a congressionally mandated study on Boeing safety culture and safety management system. As you see, this concept of safety culture, safety management system, human systems integration, as I tell my students, is cross-cutting. It affects nuclear power industry, chemical processing, deep water drilling, and aviation, and healthcare. I'm involved in a lot of patient safety related research with different hospitals and healthcare systems.
Wow, thank you. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you've
Oh,
had
go
an
ahead.
incredible career. You had an incredible career. I think what's interesting to me is that your career is very much safety centric, but I remember seeing a piece in the Dornstein magazine where you were at Chernobyl without any safety gear, just looking down the reactor. But yeah.
Yeah, that photo is over there, Roshan. I was in a suit and tie. Because at that time when I visited Chernobyl upset happened in 86. I visited 97. At the year 97, Chernobyl, if you remember, had 4 operating reactors. Reactor number 4 exploded, and then they put that on sarcophagus. But reactor number 1, I think it caught in fire. Reactor number 2, they shut it down. Reactor number 3 was still operational, which was like 100 meters away from sarcophagus. And when I went there, I spent time in the control room of reactor number 3 and that, and all the workers and that. We didn't even carry the badge that the reactor operators are carrying in the United States. By the way, I was appointed to this Diablo Canyon Independent Nuclear Safety Committee, which is like a state of California mini nuclear regulatory commission for the state of California with overseeing the safety of Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. I went for my first fact-finding meeting over there. I spent 2 days in the plant, and we carry multiple radiation detector and dosage collector. We were tested before going in and after coming out. And same thing in Fukushima. Fukushima, they measured us before going to the plant. And even though we had the Tyvek suit and face mask and respirator, they measured us when we were coming, but they measured everything. Chernobyl, no, I was in suit and tie.
It's terrible. I'm glad you're doing good. You look like you're in good health now. I was reading actually at the end of the article, I saw you were talking about a thing called the small modular reactor. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, again, this is not necessarily related to my research. I'm not in the design of a small modular reactor, but I follow this technology, which they call that new reactor design or inherently safe reactor design. There are multiple names for that. Think of Roshan, think of a huge diesel generator, electric diesel generators that generates electricity. These big generators, the diesel generators, or sometimes that when you go to see, for example, in a filming area, you see that they bring these big, huge generators that you hear the noise with a truck. For a lack of better term, the small modular reactor is like this. You build different pieces of these reactors in the factory and then bring it and then put that as different modules together at a site. They are totally different in their design, cooling system, and that from these giant reactors that we have right now that you assemble, not only assemble, you built it on site. It's not very much factory made that you bring just 2 or 3 different pieces and put them together and run it. And then some of them are, for example, they use molten salt as coolant as opposed to pressurized water. We have PWR, pressurized water reactor, that they use pressurized water for cooling. And then these new designs, they use molten salt and other types of that. That's why they become very popular now, because just like a diesel generator, you build different pieces together and then take that to the site and just put these different modules together and then turn it on. It generates power. But they are still at I don't say design stage. Some of them have passed the design stage. They got the license, and they expect they come on basically around year 2030, 2035, and that. And there are many countries that are working on that. There are SMRs, small modular reactors in United States. There are people working in China on SMRs, in collaboration between Russia and some other countries that are working on that. In South Korea, uh, there is a big organization in Korea, KEPCO, Korean Electric and Nuclear Power Corporation. They are working on the design of a KEPCO, I think, design of SMRs and that. They say it's the future for nuclear power.
The thing that I'm not really understanding is that I see that there's growth in this field of SMRs, but or small, yeah, SMRs. But why is there also a backwards trend in retiring older reactors? So is there even a greater adoption of nuclear technology if we're seeing a forward push in SMRs, but a backwards pull in older nuclear reactors?
See, the older nuclear reactors, in fact, you're asking a good question, Roshan. Some of the older nuclear reactors that got retired, particularly in the last 5 years or so, they were retired not because of safety issue or embrittlement of the reactor pressure vessel and that. They were retired primarily because of economic factors. And the two examples that I can point out to you, one of them is the Palisades plant on the coast of the Lake Michigan, and the other one, Three Mile Island Unit 1. Three Mile Island Unit 2 was the one that had accident in 1979. But Three Mile Island Unit 1 was operating until 5 years ago. Both of these, they retired because of the economies and economic factors and the cheap gas price.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they couldn't compete with the gas-fired uh, energy generation plants. But you may have heard that both of these Palisades plants and Three Mile Island Unit 1 are being brought back to life and being basically will be restarted in order to use them for producing electrical energy for this new, what I call that gas guzzlers, that we have this technology, which is AI data centers.
Yeah.
This has unprecedented in the history of the world or in United States that these two plants are being back. And that's what, going back to your good question, I do not think that there will be nuclear reactors being retired in United States in the near future because of economic factors. And that's why I think that trend has stopped. Maybe they retired them for other reasons, but not because of economic factor, which was the case for Palisades and TMI 1.
So are you also saying that SMR? Oh, sorry. You can go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just gonna follow up with the next question, but if you have more.
Okay, sorry, yeah. So are you saying that the SMRs are more energy efficient or for cost-wise?
SMRs are
Because
very promising, very promising. First of all, because you're building it in different, as the name says, small modular reactor. You're building that at modular design, and you bring these modules and just plug them to each other, and then you start generate electricity. And their design, we have something which is called SMR, which is a small modular reactor, but then we have MSR, molten salt reactor, which is a category of SMR that use molten salt. I think it's called MSR, which is a category of SMR, which is very promising, in fact. And if you follow the news, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we are talking about the early November, it was in mid-October, there was a news release that Google signed a major contract with a startup company to get, Sundar Pichai, I think the president of Google or CEO, they signed a contract with a major startup that they are making this version of SMR, which is called MSR, I think is called Kairos. I think the name of the organization was Kairos. Anyway, these small modular reactors, some of them are inherently safe. They don't use pressurized water. And if they lose coolant, they automatically shut themselves down. However, there is a very prominent scientist and a scholar from Union of Concerned Scientists. His name is Dr. Edwin Lyman. Dr. Edwin Lyman has written several monographs published by the Union of Concerned Scientists about the safety concerns, as I call it, concerns of small modular reactors. In fact, he has a very important monograph, which is called Advance is Not Necessarily Beautiful. If you remember, there was a slogan, small is beautiful. And he calls this category advanced reactors. He says in that monograph that advanced is not necessarily beautiful. And he has some concerns over there.
And with the large tech companies that are interested in these nuclear energy systems to power their data centers, could you explain the reasoning behind their interest? And do you think that recommissioning, like you mentioned, recommissioning 3 Mile Island is a good idea?
Sure. Let me give you a few statistics that all of this was published in the last 5-6 months only. Think of a data center for AI. I give you one number, which I read that in the Economist magazine. They say a large data center may need something like 1 gigawatt of energy to run. 1 gigawatt, a large data center. That's one number that I would like you to remember. These are really energy guzzlers. The other piece of information that I read in an article, I think that article I vividly remember, was written by Dr. Jaber Al-Sultan, who is an alumni of Viterbi, and he's a graduate of Mork Family Department of Chemical and Petroleum Engineering. He was Dr. Ershaghi's student. Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber, who is Minister of Petroleum of Abu Dhabi, the head of ADNOC, Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. Sultan Al-Jaber had an article a few months ago, and in that article he said that it is expected by year 2030, 2030 is 6 years from now. By year 2030, the need for electrical power for the data centers in the world will grow by 160% of today. 160%. That's what I remember reading from Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber that is stuck in my mind. I can find you the reference and send that to you. There is also another very important number that I read that in an article in New York Times. I vividly remember the title of the article, AI's Insatiable Appetite for Energy. That was the title of this article. AI's insatiable appetite for energy. In that article, they said that I think the demand of electricity in United States because of these AI centers will grow by 20% in United States by year 2030. See, we are talking an industry that didn't exist 5-6 years ago. before ChatGPT and that.
Yeah.
By the way, there was a very interesting article. Again, I don't know if it was Economist or Financial Times in last 2 or 3 weeks, that they said the goals that the COP conferences, Conference of Parties, UN Climate Change Conference, that 1.5 degrees centigrade that they established that in Paris, I think it was 2015 or 2016, that they said we have to keep the global warming at the level of 1.5. We had a hard time achieving that goal, but now because of the need of data center, there is no way we can do that. We have to go back to fossil fuel because of this guzzlers. This is a very important phenomena, Mila, that this new technology, as I told you, this is phenomena. One data center using 1 gigawatt of energy, just one facility, 1 gigawatt. I was at Diablo Canyon just 2 months ago, and I was in the turbine and generator room. There is this huge GE generator, a Westinghouse generator, that is the size of almost a school bus. There are two of these generators over there. Just think about that. These two generators, each one of them, there are something like 900 megawatts electric. These two generators, they generate 10% of the electricity of the state of California. Two generators in one room, two schools, two generator sizes, two school bus. One is attached to unit one for unit 2. And imagine that each generator, these two generators, they generate 10% of electricity for California, okay? Something around, this is 800 megawatt, 800, 900 megawatt and that. Imagine that. This one data center will need one of these guys only working for to supply energy to this data center, and it's not even 1 gigawatt.
Yeah.
So this is what we are dealing with.
Do you think that recommissioning units like 3 Mile Island is a good idea?
Do we have any choice?
That's true.
We don't have any choice. I mean, this is the reality of the energy. And see, I'm an engineer, and this is one thing I say. I'm not anti-nuclear. I'm not pro-nuclear. I'm not anti-this. I'm a very overworked, underpaid professor of engineering. But what I look at this, that before AI, we needed energy. Again, we are dealing with, Mila and Roshan, a double exigency. I call it double exigency. One exigency was we need reliable source of energy. Reliable source of energy. This thing became even more important after the shutdown of Nord Stream pipeline from Russia to Europe, that they didn't have that and that. We need the reliable, Europe needed reliable source of energy. Yeah, more energy reliable. And then the other side of that, that we are going for decarbonization of our energy sources. On one end, you want to cut down your fossil fuel to decarbonize that. On the other end, you want more reliability. And now with this AI, you need even more and more energy. How can we match these two things? This thing that you are creating gaps. If you want to retire your coal-fired power plant because of the CO2 emission, and then at the same time, you are going with this is a widening gap that we have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you make some really great points. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, Dr. Meshkati, I know you're for nuclear energy, like you just said, and but I was wondering, one thing we always hear about nuclear energy is nuclear waste, right? Can you first explain what nuclear waste is and basically what the problem is with it concerning it in the United States or in the world as well, for that matter.
Nuclear power plant, the typical nuclear power plants that we have, being pressurized water reactor or boiling water reactor, PWR or BWR. These are huge nuclear reactors that they exist all over the world. When they burn enriched uranium, after that uranium is burnt in the reactor, you need to refuel the reactor. In a matter of it, you put the fuel bundle in the reactor and they last maybe, I don't know, a year or so. And then you need to remove them. Reactor goes through the shutdown and what's called refueling process. The fuel bundle, you take it out from reactor. This is still hot and this is still radioactive. The amount of radioactivity that you have in the spent fuel may not be very good for being in the reactor, but this is still hot. This is still generates heat. And that's why when you take it out from the reactor vessel, you move it and you put it in something which is called a spent fuel pool. Spent fuel pool is something that when you remove the fuel bundle from the reactor over there for it to cool down. A spent fuel pool needs constant circulation of water. And the typical, I forgot the exact, different reactors, different fuel bundle is different, but this spent fuel stays in this spent fuel pool in 3 to 4, 5 years for its temperature to go down, to cool down. And that's
3 to 5 years.
Sorry?
It takes 5 years for it to cool down.
5 or 6 years. I forgot the exact number. To cool down, it temperatures goes down. Okay, and then, or maybe longer. Again, I don't remember the exact number. This is you can Google it, you can find it. Once that its temperature goes down to a certain level, which is, again, I forgot the exact number, you take it from there, from a spent fuel pool, and you put that in the dry cask. Dry cask are this huge cylinder type of thing that there is cement and concrete, and that you put this fuel bundle, you cap the top and bottom, and you take it to an area which is called dry cask storage area. And it stays there. That is one step before you burying that. The whole idea in United States was this. You have the nuclear reactors, they generate waste, you take the waste to spent fuel pool, and then after that you remove that spent fuel pool from the cooled thing from there, put that in the dry cask, and dry cask you store it over there. And in United States was this plan to move all these dry casks from all these nuclear plants in United States to an area in Nevada, which is called Yucca Mountain. Yucca Mountain. That the Department of Energy has spent over $1 billion. It's a depleted salt or something, and it was for the permanent storage of this spent fuel. Wow. The problem is that Yucca Mountain, after spending even more than $1 billion of your taxpayer money, it is still in limbo. President Obama basically created a Blue Ribbon Commission to decide on the fate of the Yucca Mountain. And it was basically still in limbo. And then there's also another problem. All these states that are here between, let's say, East Coast to Nevada, they say we wouldn't allow this spent fuel this dry cask to be transported over our state to Yakamata. In United States, unfortunately, the issue of the spent fuel is mired in political controversy. In some other countries, it's much handled easier, like France. In some countries, they do reprocessing of spent fuel. But the problem with reprocessing is the nuclear proliferation, because you can
What do you mean by that?
get plutonium from the spent fuel. One way to nuclear bomb is through reprocessing the spent fuel. Another way to nuclear bomb is uranium enrichment through centrifuge.
Mhm.
That's
So
why
is that regulated by like the UN or something? Is that like an issue?
International Atomic Energy Agency, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is headquartered in Vienna, which is one of the UN specialized agency which was created by United States after President Dwight Eisenhower Atom for Peace speech in December 1953, I think, has a big mission which is called Safeguard. And then safety is a smaller child. But safeguard, this is the job of International Atomic Energy Agency to make sure the countries that have signed non-proliferation treaty, that's a different lecture, if you like. You have to take my engineering diplomacy class and we talk about that. But that is going back to the spent fuel. In United States, we don't do reprocessing. France does reprocessing and they have
But
solved
why that disconnect, right? It seems that France is getting, the best of both worlds. They're able to do proliferation and reprocess the spent fuel. They don't
I
have to store,
I think
right?
it's more politics and
Mhm.
the will of the country. As you may know, Roshan, France gets something like 75% of its electricity from 54 or so nuclear reactor. It's called electricity generation share. France has the highest electricity generation share in the world
Wow.
because of its nuclear plant. France has a very good, it used to be called a good advantage because the reactor design in France is very much a standard. And that's what they were able to maintain them easily. They were able to run it easily. However, they faced a problem last year or 2 years ago that there was a common cause failure that crippled several nuclear reactors. They had to shut it down and they were on shortage of energy on that. But France is a country that has been able to utilize nuclear energy to the most efficient and less problematic thing. And there is much more public acceptance for nuclear energy in France than in the United States. And the same thing was in Japan before the Fukushima accident. Japan, I think, I don't remember, as I get older, I forget these numbers. But in Japan, before Fukushima, something like 30+% of Japanese electricity came from their nuclear plants. And there was a good interest in more and more nuclear in Japan. But of course, Fukushima changed that. However, there was an article in New York Times just last week that Japanese also, after they decided to get rid of the nuclear and that after Fukushima, Japanese also reconsidering nuclear. One country that you will be interested in looking at its ups and downs for nuclear is Sweden. Sweden,
Yeah.
sorry, Sweden after Chernobyl, they had, for lack of a better term, a knee-jerk reaction. They said, we need to shut down our nuclear plants. They shut down one or two or three, and then it was working. And then Fukushima happened. Then they say, oh, we have to shut down more. But now Sweden is one of the most uh, enthusiastic countries for nuclear. It is fascinating to watch uh, Sweden and the change in the public opinion in Sweden. I tell you a little story. In November 2023, just almost a year ago, there was this COP28 conference of parties, UN Climate Change Conference in Abu Dhabi. And in Dubai, sorry, in Dubai, in United Arab Emirates. And I was invited and I went there. It was around late November, early December, maybe. And then there was a parallel conference to that, or side conference called Net Zero Nuclear Conference that was going on also in Dubai, that I attended that one also. I was invited to that. And 22 countries, please listen to this, Mila and Roshan, 22 countries, they signed a pledge at this net zero nuclear conference summit, called Net Zero Nuclear Summit. 22 countries, their official representative, they signed a pledge to increase the nuclear power production to threefold by year 2050. And
wow.
I heard Mila and Roshan, that number of 22 countries has reached to 34 countries as of last March.
Wow.
I think,
And one of the countries which was the leading the pack was Sweden in that.
I know they've historically had more liberal and progressive policies towards energy generation in the past, which is interesting. It's interesting to see the difference with public sentiment and the change in public sentiment after big events like the Chernobyl disaster.
See, because when you really look at that, see, we have all these electric cars. I was talking to my mentor, Dr. Don Paul, that for all these electrical cars, where does this electron should come from? With all these electric cars, with all these heat pumps, all of these, we want to replace the fossil fuel, okay. But where are we going to get these electrons? How we are going to make these electrons? I mean, there is, of course, we have a big paper here with our students about offshore wind benefits and challenges in California. We did a big analysis. There are three undergraduate brilliant students that they work on that: Yamini Kumar, Josh Jacob, Isabel Reynoso. They were my student. Their name is on that paper with Professor Adam Rose and his research assistant, Nathaniel, over there. But that offshore energy is still in development and it has a lot of challenges in that. But we need these electrons. And we need to make more electrons.
And could you explain your opinion more with this need for an additional source of energy with all these transitions in our technologies that's happening? What is your opinion on, or if when or if we can even harness the potential of fusion energy for commercial power?
Fusion is a totally new technology. People at Lawrence Livermore Lab, of course, in California, they have been working on that. In that Net Zero Nuclear Summit in Dubai, there were people from Europe, startups, and that they work on fusion. But being honest with you, I'm not qualified to make a statement on that because this is way beyond my level of education. There are still issues with respect to physics of its system design and that. And I really don't know to what extent it could be commercialized in the short run. Whereas a small modular reactor is something that's going to come up by year, as I mentioned, to 2030 or 2031, 32. Fusion, I don't know about that. Again, I read about that, try to educate myself, but I don't know when it can be commercial. Of course, I hear about its potential and it's unlimited source of energy and that, but I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And circling back just to your conversation about Sweden, I was wondering, I'm really interested in the public opinion thing, right? And I know that nuclear energy is purported to be one of the most useful and clean energies for our growth. We have, as you mentioned, there's data centers, there's also more electrical cars and things like that. But how do we deal with the fear factor when we're talking about adopting new nuclear technologies like SMRs, just nuclear generators in general? How do we deal with the fear factor there with the public?
That is, Roshan, that is, you touched the soft area in my heart about the human factors of nuclear safety. That's what I spent my entire professional life on that, I would say. The problem is this. Unfortunately, many, if you look at the Three Mile Island accident, for example, that's what I started. When you look at the design of some of these control rooms, this is where you have the human interfacing the machine and they need to run that. They were really awful. I mean, for lack of better term, awful. Human factors was totally ignored.
What do you mean by that?
For in the design of the control of nuclear power plant. In fact, I have an old presentation that I show it in my human factors class as the flaws that were incorporated, violation of human factors principles, and that in design of this control room. Unfortunately, again, this is a lesson I learned by spending 1 year on the FAA expert panel on Boeing. I mean, the root cause of the accidents, the crashes of two 737 killing 346 people, Lion Air and Ethiopian Airline, there was the bad design of MCAS, maneuvering characteristic augmentation system. And why they did that? Because Boeing lost its soul. They had the best human factors group, but then they decided to dismantle that, relocate that, and decimate that. That's what the root cause of, I mean, it caused these crashes. If
When
we,
you're sorry, when you're talking about human factors, could you give an example of that? Like how people are interfacing exactly with the technology? Is that what you mean, like UI?
human factors both inside the plant, running the technology, and also understanding and receiving and understanding the risk of the technology at both levels. The more important thing that I'm concerned is running the technology. I say that, and I've been on the record about that. We need to give equal and adequate attention to human factors of this technology, whereas to the engineering and technical aspect of technology. If we don't give equal and adequate attention to these two subsystems, this subsystem is going to pull the whole system down. And that's what, unfortunately, the lion's share always goes to technical consideration. And that's why you have this problem that happened in the case of Boeing, in the case of Chernobyl, in the case of TMI.
And those all definitely contribute to the fear factor, right? Against not the Boeing case, but I'm talking about in the you said the nuclear control centers, the human factors there, the way that they designed it was bad, that creates those accidents, and then that propels the fear factor, is what you're saying.
Yeah, because, for example, one of the biggest disaster that we happened, both Chernobyl and Fukushima, they were both preventable. They were both caused by safety culture issues. I mean, I, I, uh, I rest my case here.
Yeah.
If the two biggest accidents in the history of nuclear power were both caused by human factors and safety culture, aren't these two data points enough for you to fix the problem and learn from these two for the third one to prevent the third one?
But you bring up a lot of amazing points. Dr. Meshkati, thank you so much for your time today and for your continued support of the Energy Transition Talk. And before we leave, is there anything that we forgot to ask you that you think is important to share with our audience?
I mean, thank you very much, Mila, for your kind comments. And Roshan, I really enjoyed our conversation. You asked beautiful questions and you're very smart people. I at Ershadi Center for Energy Transition is in my heart and in my mind because I deeply respect Dr. Iraj Ershadi and Dr. Don Paul. And I think this is a great effort at USC. And I think energy transition, without looking at the safety related issue, will not address all the thing. I was talking, Dr. Ershadi, about this issue of carbon capture, sequestration, and storage, which is a big part of energy transition. The example that I point out to is Aliso Canyon gas leak that we had here in California in 2015, 2016. My student and I, we wrote a paper about the root causes of Aliso Canyon gas leak. Again, the problem that caused Aliso Canyon gas leak, according to our paper, which, by the way, investigated by California Public Utilities Commission, which they ask Sempra Energy, which is a parent company, Aliso Canyon gas leak, parent company of Southern California Gas Company, to look at their safety culture. That gas leak, we have to learn lessons from that for carbon capture, sequestration, and storage. The same things that went on in about Aliso Canyon, unfortunately, could happen in any type of carbon capture, sequestration, and storage if we don't learn lessons. That's what I say. These topics that I talk about, some of them could be industry specific, but the root causes of that are cross-cutting. That's my last message. Yes, spent fuel pool is a problem with the nuclear reactors if we don't have circulation over there, but the factors that could go on in losing circulation in terms of preventive maintenance and corrective maintenance is a cross-cutting issue, which part of that could be related to the safety culture of the utility that runs this system. That's what I say, that no matter what technology you run, when it's a safety critical technology, you are equally vulnerable to other safety critical technologies, failure causing factors. And that's what we learn. We need to learn from each other and to apply the lessons that we learn from one industry to another industry, because the cross-cutting nature of these factors.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's really well said.
We in our energy transition talk so far, we haven't considered the safety aspect of it. We've just been thinking theoretically. I think this is an invaluable addition to the podcast.
Oh, because when you look at it, I mean, I think Aliso Canyon gas leak is a good case study for my friends in energy transition. I would suggest that forget nuclear, forget aviation. Look at the Aliso Canyon gas leak, just that incident, how it precipitated and what happened. It became a major costly thing for gas companies, several up to $1 billion maybe they had to pay for the damages in that. And it could have been easily preventable.
Yeah, I think we're seeing the pattern of all the disasters you brought up is they're all preventable, right? You said 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Aliso Canyon were all preventable. I think in the future, especially because I think we're going to have more energy generating like nuclear powered SMRs. We need to consider the human factors, I guess, in the safety.
You hit the nail. You hit the nail, Roshan, on the head again. You and Mila are very good. There is, I don't know if you guys can see it over there. That frame that you see is a write-up over there. That's a write-up that I printed out. This is a big quote by Valery Legazov. I don't know if you guys have watched that 6 episode on HBO about Chernobyl accident. He's the main character in that Chernobyl thing. That's a quote by Valery Legazov that he said that when Chernobyl accident happened in 86, we should have learned, interestingly enough, as we talk about that, in that quote that he said in 1986 after Chernobyl accident, he said that we should have learned from Bhopal accident that happened in 84, even though it was a chemical plant accident in India. Then he says that we should have learned from Three Mile Island accident that happened in the United States in 1979. And then he said, had we learned from these two different accidents in two different countries, we could have prevented Chernobyl. This is Valery Legazov's statement. That's what I frame, and it's on the wall of my office.
That's, I think the parallels would be seen throughout, right? There's used
Yeah.
parallels.
By the way, I've watched that episode on Chernobyl, and I thought it's excellent. It was really, really good.
Beautifully
good about
done, and
Yeah.
it was beautifully done. And I think it had some dramatization, and there were some characters that didn't exist. However, for example, that last scene about Legazov in the courtroom talking about different things that happened, and that it didn't happen in reality. But the Legazov character that who committed suicide on the second anniversary of the accident by hanging himself, and his disillusionment with the Soviet nuclear industry and government, I think that's a very important lesson from that. And again, that quote that I have, I came across that in an obscure source on Chernobyl. That quote is always in my mind and on my wall over there, that we need to learn from each other, from different industry. Don't be just egoistic and industry-centric, and don't say it never happens to us. One lesson that I learned, Bilo, you asked me, what is my last word? I said, after I came back from Chernobyl, and then it was reinforced after I came back from Fukushima, is this one thing. Always think about unthinkable. Both of these two accidents, unfortunately, or disaster, were unthinkable, but they happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
A Spanish historian by the name of Santayana talked
Those
about
who
the quote,
ignore
those
history
who fail to
have to
learn from
relive
the
it.
history are doomed to repeat it.
George Santayana's quote is one of my favorite quotes, Mr. Cranton. Those who ignore history, they have to repeat it or relive it. Yeah.
Just hope we don't repeat it at Zaporizhia, which is about as vulnerable a place right now as you can think of for an industrial process.
Yeah, the Zaporizhia nuclear plant, I follow that closely, and I've had some pieces published in The Conversation about that, and gave some interviews to BBC or Deutsche Welle and others. Back, Roshan, you asked me about the spent fuel. Zaporizhia, all the reactors are shut down. We don't have a problem of meltdown. The problem at Zaporizhia are those spent fuel pools that they need electricity for their circulation. In fact, the thing that happened in Fukushima, it was not only the reactor meltdown, it was we lost circulation in the spent fuel pool, and the temperature rise because we don't have circulation, and the zirconium cladding of this fuel bundle they got with the hot water, they created hydrogen and then exploded, and we had a radiation release, not because of shutdown, because the reactors are under the containment. Reactors, they have the containment. The radiation release from Fukushima was from exploding spent fuel from a spent fuel pool, which is not under the containment building. Zaporizhia, now we have that problem, that because of the war, we are losing the off-site power, and then we need to rely on the diesel generator to generate power for the spent fuel. And if we don't have circulation in the spent fuel, that causes problem. There is also another problem in Zaporizhia and the dry cask area. There's some storage of fuel in the dry cask. And if there is big projectile, like missiles or rockets, if they hit these cylinders of that, it's going to crack open and release radiation also.
I found it really interesting how Dr. Meshkati describes himself as the accidental professor with interests in industrial energy and also international relations.
In addition to engineering principles, he investigates things like human factors, human factor issues, human activities, interaction with industrial process systems, such as the accident in 1979 at 3 Mile Island, as well as Chernobyl and the 2005 BP refinery in Texas City. And it's very interesting the way he works on different accidents and stuff. I remember one time he told us that he was at Chernobyl without a suit, so pretty interesting stuff.
Exactly. And it's interesting to see how his focus is on how safety critical technology systems operate. This meaning with human factors and organizational, cultural, and even technological systems and their safeties and how they operate.
His view of the future of nuclear energy includes small modular reactors, built in a factory and assembled on site with standard designs, molten salt versus pressurized water cooling systems. But he has some concerns about safety.
Right. He recognizes the gigascale data centers for AI. 1 gigawatt, for example, to run is considered an energy guzzler, and by 2030 will grow to 160%, where, AI is insustaiable appetite for energy, like he said, and it will grow by 20% in the US, influencing the overall energy demand.
Mhm. The two GE generators at Diablo Canyon generate 10% of California's energy, and it needs about 900 megawatts. So think about what a 1 gigawatt data center would need. It's an absolutely crazy, mind-boggling sort of number.
Exactly. And he thinks that we don't have any choice but to reopen older nuclear plants and increase the gas-fired power plants for AI data centers.
Some of the issues are that spent fuel cooling pools need circulating water, and they take around 5 to 6 years to cool down. And then you have to place the rods in dry cement cast and then bury it and move it to the Yucca Mountain in Nevada for permanent storage. All those plans are in political limbo ever since President Obama's term. And so reprocessing spent fuel in France is not even allowed in the US due to concerns over nuclear proliferation.
And Sweden, for example, is one of the more positive countries for nuclear now.
34 countries have signed UN agreements to increase nuclear power in a recent UN treaty.
And he's concerned about where are we going to go? Where are we going to get the electrons when we phase down fossil fuel?
Well, one more angle that he's spinning onto in this is how do you deal with the fear factor about nuclear energy? Human factors were ignored in early control rooms designs, but is that the way we're going to think about it in the future?
Yeah, and his focus is a lot on cross-cutting issues, learning from our past incidences, like Chernobyl, and focusing on human factors and really prioritizing safety culture. We have learned that electrification of power, transportation, and other forms of energy are going to need more mineral resources, sometimes called critical minerals. But do we know where these minerals are located? And what is the supply chain needed to bring back those minerals to the market?
Another government policy theme is to bring back industries back to the United States. That means the mines, industrial facilities, semiconductor fabs, and data centers, which will focus on locations in the US and especially in the Western US. What about the rights of impacted and disadvantaged communities? We have an opportunity to talk to Dr. Richard Luarkey of the NAMES Initiative at the Payne Institute for Public Policy and Ian Tafoya, the Colorado State Chairman of Green Latinos, to get their perspectives on this.
A recent study published in Nature Sustainability found that 45% of mining projects globally are located on or near Indigenous peoples' lands. And in the United States, 79% of lithium, 68% of cobalt, and 97% of nickel and 89% of copper reserves
and resources in the United States are located within 35 miles of Native American reservations.
Are we headed towards a competition that pits new data centers and electric vehicles and the reduction of carbon emissions against the sacred grounds and rights of Native American people? And what about the role of minority communities in the urban rural settings? This is really serious stuff. In these episodes, we try to learn more from voices that are often ignored and left out. This is a real opportunity to listen and learn.
I really found my way to Green Latinos because the state of Colorado and the city and county of Denver made the decision to widen a highway through the community I grew up in for the second time in 50 years. And I started to learn about environmental injustice, the idea of communities speaking up, asking for a different solution and not being granted that solution. And instead, profit motives seem to win the day. In particular, this project was a $2 billion project for just a couple miles, if you can imagine that, and taking dozens of homes, pulling up Superfund soil and so much more. I first started to learn about that project when I was working at the city. I staffed the Land Use and Transportation Committee for the Denver City Council. And I was like, whoa, like this project's wrong. So I quit my job. I ran for office at 28 years old. I challenged the project, sued the state of Colorado, filed National Environmental Policy Act lawsuit, Clean Air Act lawsuit, and a Title VI complaint for discrimination. Ultimately, ended up settling the Clean Air Act lawsuit, which has led to cumulative impacts, health studies that's taking place in the community I grew up in. And it was through that I really started to realize, like, whoa, like I come from a community where my house, the closest thing to my house is the Coca-Cola factory. And then the next closest thing is an intermodal interchange for trains. And then in the distance, you could see the elevated highway. And in the distance behind that was a coal plant turned gas plant, which is across the street from a wastewater plant and a refinery. And that's the community I grew up in. And how I ended up there is because my mom was a social worker and she got her first home. And where could she afford? But in a community that turns out had a lot of cumulative impacts from pollution. And honestly, it's impacted my mother's health, my community members' health. And so I got involved in fighting back. I was brought to Washington, D.C. to testify at my first EPA hearing, and I met Green Latinos there. And what Green Latinos is a national intersectional membership of people working on environment. Some people come from frontline environmental justice communities like me, some people in government, some people in public health, some people in like ESG for businesses, right? There's all these sectors coming together, trying to share our resources and convene with each other to have solutions that have historically left us out, right? In particular, the environmental movement, predominantly white dominant space historically, and that comes with its own failures of lack of creativity and solutions that don't meet our communities. Green Latinos originally was the National Latino Coalition for Climate Change, NLCCC, really long name, even longer in Spanish. 12 years ago, we changed our name to Green Latinos. And I had the honor as a member to start the first state-based Green Latinos Colorado. It'll be 6 years old in May. And now we actually have 5 states, Texas, New Mexico, Illinois, and California. And we are intent on continuing to grow our state-based work, predominantly work at the federal level, founded in DC, right? We're in EPA and regulatory and legislative and working in that place. And then at the state level, you know, we work on state issues, state legislative issues. I personally had the chance to work on a bunch of laws, including the Environmental Justice Act. The Environmental Justice Act of Colorado also created a task force to reform more than a dozen state agencies. And I was appointed by the Speaker of the House. I ultimately served as the chair of that task force. And so really our guiding principles are alignment with the national priorities, but also this roadmap that we've laid out for environmental justice. And one big thing I guess I'd just close with is saying, like, I approach it all through being a teacher first. We need to teach people about public health. We need to teach people about permits. We need to teach people about zoning. Again, nothing that you get in school. And so we have to find a way of turning that into action while also creating space in a culturally informed way for people. And I have been very honored in my time when I took over. I said, there's no way we can call ourselves Green Latinos Colorado unless we go all across Colorado. I've been to all 64 counties. I've met with community members, and you know, we're here to support them in their local fights and then to bridge them into state and federal policy.
Thank you so much for joining us for the Future of Energy. Special thanks to each of our guests today and to our technical wizard, Abhi, for his important contributions to this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you can automatically get access to all our new episodes. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.